The days passed slowly after that shared moment of laughter, but something had shifted. Though Amy still kept her distance from Golden Heart, she couldn't help but notice him more often. He didn't push her, didn't try to force any conversations. Instead, he simply continued his quiet work in the village, helping those who needed it, always with that same calm kindness. Amy found herself watching him from afar, as she had before, but this time it was different. There was no suspicion, no doubt. Just curiosity and something she couldn't quite name. She wasn't ready to trust him fully, not yet, but his presence had begun to feel safe, almost comforting in a way that surprised her. One morning, Amy found herself by the edge of the village, overlooking the cliffs that stretched out toward the ocean. She liked to come here sometimes, away from the noise and the bustle of the village, to think. The waves crashing below had always brought her a sense of peace, but today her thoughts were more restless than usual. As she stood there staring out at the horizon, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't turn around. She knew it was Golden Heart. She had become familiar with the sound of his light steps, the way he moved quietly, never wanting to disturb anyone. He came to stand beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel his presence. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They simply stood there, side by side, watching the waves roll in and out, the wind gently tugging at their fur. Amy didn't know why, but his silence felt right. He didn't try to fill the space with questions or comments. He was just there, sharing the moment with her, and that in itself was enough. Golden Heart glanced at her briefly, sensing the quiet turmoil in her expression.
It's beautiful out here.
He said softly, his voice gentle, almost a whisper, as if he didn't want to disturb the peace of the scene. Amy nodded, still looking out at the ocean.
Yeah, it's one of the only places that makes sense sometimes.
Golden Heart didn't respond immediately. He seemed to understand the weight behind her words. Instead, he just looked out at the view with her, letting the silence stretch on. There was something comforting in it. No pressure to explain herself, no need to put her guard up, just the quiet presence of someone who wasn't asking for more than she was willing to give. For a while, they stood like that, the unspoken bond between them growing stronger. Amy could feel it, the way he didn't need words to be there for her. In another time with someone else, this silence would have felt heavy, awkward. But with Golden Heart, it was different. It was like he understood that she wasn't ready to talk, but that didn't mean she wanted to be alone. Eventually, Amy let out a soft sigh, breaking the quiet just a little.
You don't ask a lot of questions, do you?
Golden Heart smiled softly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon.
I figure if you want to say something, you will. I don't need to force it.
There was a warmth in his voice, a quiet reassurance that he was there if she needed him, but only if she chose to let him in. Amy glanced at him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. It had been a long time since someone had given her that kind of space without expecting something in return.
You're different.
She murmured, almost to herself.
Most people would have given up by now. Stop trying.
Golden Heart turned his head to look at her, his eyes calm but sincere.
I'm not here to make you trust me, Amy. I'm just here.
His words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Amy felt the full weight of them. He wasn't trying to fix her, wasn't trying to pry into her past or make her open up before she was ready. He was just present, and somehow that was more than enough. Amy's eyes drifted back to the sea, her thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite put into words. She had been alone for so long, even with her friends around, that she had forgotten what it felt like to just be with someone without walls, without the need to constantly defend herself. The waves crashed below, steady and rhythmic, a reminder of time moving forward, slowly but surely. Golden Heart said nothing more, and neither did she. But in that silence, something shifted between them. A quiet understanding, an unspoken bond that neither of them needed to acknowledge out loud. As the wind blew gently through her quills, Amy closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet comfort of Golden Heart's presence wash over her. She wasn't ready to trust him completely. She wasn't ready to let him into the deeper parts of her heart that were still scarred and guarded. But for now, this was enough. This silent companionship, this unspoken connection. It was more than she had allowed herself to feel in a long time. After a long while, Amy opened her eyes again and glanced over at Golden Heart.
Thanks!
She said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Golden Heart turned to her, his expression soft.
For what?
For not asking.
She replied, her gaze dropping to the ground.
For just being here.
Golden Heart didn't say anything in response, but his gentle smile spoke volumes. He nodded slightly as if to say that he understood, that he didn't need her to explain. Without another word, Amy turned and began walking back toward the village, her footsteps light but steady. Golden Heart remained where he was, watching her go with the same quiet patience he had shown all along. As she walked away, Amy realized that something had shifted inside her. She wasn't ready to fully open up to him, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards something more. But for now, the silence was enough. The unspoken bond between them was enough. And that was all she needed.